An elderly woman with a humble appearance enters a market, as she has done for years. But this time, she is treated with disdain by the employees, ignored, and even expelled by the manager. What no one knew was that this woman was hiding a secret that would completely change everyone's perception. The next day, she returns to the market, this time accompanied by lawyers, and reveals something that no one would have ever expected. A story that makes us reflect on how we judge people by their appearance and how small gestures can have big consequences. What will she reveal? Before I tell you all the details of this incredible story, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of the amazing stories we share here. It was an ordinary afternoon in the city. The sun was already preparing to hide among the tall buildings, and the streets were buzzing with people coming and going, all in a hurry, as if time were chasing them. Amidst this movement, an elderly woman, with her white hair neatly combed, dressed simply in a long skirt and a coat worn by time, walked slowly. Her old but well-kept shoes barely made a sound on the asphalt. She wasn't the kind of person who attracted attention. Her humble appearance, with clothes that no longer followed modern trends, made most people overlook her. But contrary to what one might think, that woman carried a serenity in her gaze. Her eyes, slightly tired from the passage of years, still sparkled with deep wisdom, the fruit of many life experiences. When the elderly woman reached the market's entrance, she glanced around. The place was filled with shelves packed with products, and people passed by her without even noticing her presence. She entered with slow steps, as if each movement was calculated and calm. The automatic doors opened in front of her, and the cool air conditioning enveloped her, in contrast to the heat outside. Inside, the market was organized chaos. Carts full of groceries being pushed from one side to another, employees stocking shelves, and cashiers hurriedly checking out purchases. Everyone was immersed in their own concerns, focused on what they had to do. And there, in the middle of all that hustle and bustle, the elderly woman went unnoticed. Her small, firm steps made her glide over the white-tiled floor, like a quiet shadow. Despite her discreet appearance, she was in no rush. Her eyes calmly scanned the shelves, observing every detail, as if she were revisiting a place she knew very well. Her thin, wrinkled fingers gently touched some products, feeling the packaging as if each item held a memory. The elderly woman didn't carry luxurious bags or wear expensive clothes, but there was something about her that made her stand out, though in a subtle way. Perhaps it was the way she looked around, like someone who has seen many things in life and now observes the world with patience. Or maybe it was her calm posture, which contrasted with the hurriedness of everyone around her. As she moved through the market aisles, no one paid attention to her. The other customers were too busy with their own shopping, their phones, and their to-do lists. However, she didn't seem to mind. To her, the market was just another stop on her long day, a place where she entered and left without drawing anyone's attention. Still, at that moment, she was just a quiet figure in the crowd, walking slowly, with calm steps and a serene gaze, like someone who is in no hurry, but carries the weight of an entire life. However, not everyone in the market remained indifferent. Near the product stocking area, two young employees, still wearing their new uniforms with shiny name tags, were watching her from a distance. One of them, with his apron still half crooked, discreetly touched the arm of his colleague next to him. With a look of disdain, he nodded toward the elderly woman and whispered, "Look, a beggar must have walked into the market." A stifled chuckle escaped his lips, as if they had found something amusing to pass the time during their monotonous shift. The other employee, a bit more cautious, glanced at the lady with suspicion, but chose not to comment. However, the scorn and judgment already lingered in the air, as if her simple clothes were reason enough to be the target of prejudice. The elderly woman, however, seemed unaware, or perhaps simply chose to ignore it. She was focused on her task, taking a package of rice from the shelf and analyzing it carefully, checking the price and weight, like someone who knows the value of every penny spent. Her movements were calm, precise, as if there was no rush, as if time belonged to her, even in an environment that always seemed to be rushing. Unlike the employees who judged her from afar, she appeared oblivious to the critical gazes. It wasn't the first time her appearance had generated mistrust and disdain, but that didn't bother her. After all, her simple clothes, nearly empty basket, and calm gaze did not reflect her essence or story, only the choice of a more modest life. She knew who she was, knew what she had achieved over the years, and that was enough to keep her steady. As she slowly moved through the aisles, the sound of muffled laughter mixed with the noise of shopping carts, the beeping of registers, and the market's announcements. But for her, all of that was just a distant background. Her focus was on the simple task of buying what she needed, without paying attention to those who judged her for her exterior, without knowing the woman she truly was. With each step, she revealed unusual patience, like someone who has faced far greater challenges than the disdain of strangers. The elderly woman knew that in a world where people judge by appearance, it takes great inner strength to keep going without being affected. And that's exactly what she did. She didn't want to cause a scene or demand attention, as she had always preferred peace over conflict. Still, it was impossible not to feel the weight of that humiliation. While the other customer received the best service, the elderly woman, in silence, glanced once more at the counter, giving up on trying to be served. She took a deep breath and, with the same calmness she had entered with, decided to walk away. The small piece of cheese, which seemed like such a simple thing to get, had become something distant at that moment. Her basket was still nearly empty, and she decided to grab another item that was already on her list, without making a fuss or expressing any dissatisfaction. With her dignity intact, but her heart slightly heavy, she turned around and continued down the aisles, while the attendant continued to ignore her. In the checkout line, the elderly woman maintained her patience, waiting her turn with the same tranquility that had accompanied her since she entered the market. The line moved slowly. Customers with full carts exchanged impatient glances, while some sighed in frustration. The elderly woman, with her small basket containing only a few basic items, waited silently. Step by step, she approached the register, where a young employee, visibly disinterested in his job, attended with a bored expression. When it was finally her turn, the woman delicately placed her basket on the counter. She looked calmly at the cashier, waiting for him to ring up the items, but instead, he gave her a quick up and down glance, clearly judging her simple clothes, the old coat, and the worn shoes. His face twisted in barely concealed disdain. "Are you sure you can pay for this?" said the young man, his voice dripping with sarcasm and doubt. The words cut through like a subtle but sharp blade. He wasn't just questioning her ability to pay for the items. He was questioning her dignity. The elderly woman, calm in her posture, didn't flinch. She had faced much bigger challenges in her life and knew that keeping her composure was the best course of action. In silence, without responding to the provocation, she reached into the pocket of her coat. Her wrinkled yet firm fingers found the small handful of coins she had carefully set aside before leaving home. It was enough to pay for the few items she had selected. Calmly, she placed the coins on the counter, one by one, letting them softly clink, as if each coin represented years of effort and a life of simplicity. The cashier, visibly uncomfortable with the woman's silence, didn't hide his disdain. He glanced at the coins, then at the lady with a smirk, as if he was about to do something amusing. "You know," he began, looking around as if trying to draw the attention of other employees. "This lady here seems suspicious to me." His tone was cold, filled with arrogance. Without bothering to count the coins or scan the items, he raised his hand and signaled for the manager to come over. To him, the elderly woman was nothing more than a potential nuisance, someone he judged by her clothes and simple appearance. The woman, still silent, just watched the situation unfold with calm eyes, like someone who had already seen and been through much. She showed no anger, frustration, or embarrassment. Her demeanor was that of someone who knew that this moment, as humiliating as it might seem to many, would soon pass. The manager, a middle-aged man with a perpetually busy expression, quickly approached. Seeing the woman and the cashier in front of him, he raised an eyebrow and asked, without hiding his irritation, "What's going on here?" The cashier, feeling in control of the situation, confidently replied, pointing at the elderly woman, "This lady, I'm sure she won't be able to pay for these items. And she seems a bit suspicious, you know." The manager approached the scene with quick steps, wearing a serious expression that seemed to anticipate the discomfort he was about to encounter. His suit was perfectly aligned, and the identification badge gleamed on his chest. He had been summoned by the cashier, who looked at him with a mix of confidence and disdain, sure that he was doing the right thing by reporting the woman who, in his eyes, seemed out of place. As soon as the manager got closer, he cast a cold glance at the elderly woman, not even trying to hide his discomfort. His eyes scanned every detail of her: the old coat, the worn-out shoes, the hands holding the few coins, and the small basket with the items she intended to purchase. Then, without beating around the bush, he addressed her with a firm voice, but with a subtle tone of contempt. "Ma'am, what are you doing here?" The question was more of an accusation than a simple inquiry. The manager wasn't expecting an explanation, as in his mind, he had already judged and condemned the woman. He tilted his head slightly, as if to make it clear that he didn't believe she had any right to be in that place. The store, so organized and refined, in his words, didn't seem suitable for someone with such a humble appearance. "This is a store of a certain level," he continued, choosing his words carefully to avoid sounding rude, but making his disdain clear. "Perhaps you'd feel more comfortable in a different type of establishment." Those words, though polite in form, were deeply hurtful. It was a polite way of saying that, in his opinion, this lady didn't belong there. She, however, maintained her posture. She didn't rush to explain, didn't raise her voice in protest. She simply observed him, with the same calm and serene look, as if measuring every word, every attitude. The manager, irritated by the lack of reaction from the woman, felt the need to take a more drastic step. He didn't want a situation there, not in his pristine store, and certainly not in front of the customers who were beginning to notice the growing tension. "Security!" he called, his voice a bit louder now, attracting more attention from people around him. A burly guard, stationed at the entrance of the store, immediately responded to the call. The manager turned to the guard and, with an impatient gesture, made it clear that this was not a request. It was an order. The atmosphere in the store, until then filled with murmurs and normal activity, now seemed to be laden with uncomfortable tension. Some customers, who had noticed what was happening, stopped to watch. Some looked on with curiosity, others with discomfort, but no one said anything. They just watched the scene, waiting to see how this humiliating moment would unfold. The woman, however, remained dignified. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. Instead, she quietly collected the coins she had placed on the counter, and with a calm gesture, put them back in the pocket of her coat. The guard, now closer, accompanied her with a puzzled expression, and she began to follow his steps toward the exit. As she walked through the aisles, she could feel the stares of people. Some were quick, discreet, almost pretending that nothing was happening. But there were others that followed her with a mix of curiosity and pity. A group of customers standing near the fruit section whispered among themselves, watching the scene with no intention of intervening. Their expressions varied from disdain to silent compassion, as if they were watching an uncomfortable movie they didn't want to be a part of. A young mother, with her small child by her side, looked at the woman with evident sadness, gripping the child's hand a little tighter. Perhaps she was thinking of the injustices life brings, or, who knows, how the world often judges by appearances. But like the others, she said nothing, remaining still as the scene played out before her eyes. Other customers simply returned to their business, picking items from the shelves and pushing carts, trying to ignore the discomfort they felt, seeing an elderly person treated in such a way. No one dared to question what was happening. Indifference, in that moment, spoke louder. The woman, for her part, didn't utter a single word. She could have said something, could have defended her presence, her story, but she didn't. Perhaps having lived through similar moments in her life, she knew that sometimes silence was the most powerful response. Her silence, however, wasn't one of submission. It was a silence full of dignity, of someone who understands that the right words will come at the right time. When the security guard and she reached the automatic door of the store, the mechanical sound of the door opening seemed to resonate louder than usual, like a cold, impersonal farewell. She took a deep breath and, with one last glance at the store, walked out without looking back. There was no protest, no tears, just a quiet exit, as if she knew that the world, in its wisdom, has a way of balancing injustices. The security guard who escorted her to the sidewalk hesitated for a moment. He seemed uncertain, as if he sensed something was wrong with the situation, but was unable to act against the orders he had received. He watched her walk away and then slowly returned inside without saying a word. The next morning, the market woke up to another busy day. The employees arrived for their shifts, adjusting their uniforms, organizing shelves, and preparing to serve the usual customers. For them, it was just another ordinary day, like so many others. Little did they know that an unexpected visit was about to completely change the course of things. Outside, a sleek black car stopped smoothly at the market entrance. The vehicle was a symbol of status and power, something that immediately caught the attention of everyone passing by. It was rare to see such a luxurious car parked in front of that establishment. The shine of the car's body reflected the morning sun, and people around began to wonder who could be inside such an impressive car. The door of the car opened, and to everyone's surprise, the first person to step out was the elderly woman from the previous day. However, this time, her appearance contrasted entirely with the humble image she had shown before. Her clothing was still simple, but her posture was different. There was a confidence in her walk that hadn't been there before, and beside her, two impeccably dressed lawyers and an assistant accompanied her closely. Her firm and decisive steps made it clear that this wouldn't be just any visit. The employees inside watched the scene with curious and confused looks. One of the employees, who had scorned her the day before, recognized her immediately, and a chill ran down his spine. He whispered to the colleague next to him, "It's that woman from the other day. What's happening?" As she approached the market entrance, the elderly woman walked with a determination that drew everyone's eyes to her. She was no longer the woman who had been ignored and humiliated in the checkout line. Now, she seemed larger, more imposing, accompanied by her lawyers, who held folders of documents in their hands. The automatic doors of the market opened for her once again, but this time, the impact of her arrival was felt by everyone present. The expressions on the employees' faces were a mixture of surprise, nervousness, and anticipation. The silence that filled the room was almost palpable. The elderly woman didn't stop to look around. Her eyes were fixed on the goal ahead. Her steps, once slow and discreet, now echoed on the tiled floor of the market, like a warning that something important was about to happen. The manager, the same one who had reprimanded her and ordered her to be escorted out of the store, was quickly informed of her arrival. He left the office with an expression of disbelief. Seeing the scene, his eyes widened. His heart raced as he tried to process what was happening. The elderly woman he had scorned the previous day had returned, but now in a position of authority he could never have imagined. She walked towards him without averting her gaze. The manager, visibly uncomfortable, stepped forward, trying to maintain his posture of control, but his confidence was already shaken. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words got stuck. The elderly woman, now with the lawyers by her side, stopped right in front of him. Her gaze was firm, but there was no arrogance, only the calm of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was doing there. At that moment, the entire market seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the outcome of this unexpected scene. The employees who recognized her from the previous day were paralyzed. Their minds were trying to process what they were seeing. The elderly woman, the same one they had ignored and treated with disdain, now entered the market in a completely different manner. Murmurs began to rise among them. Whispers of confusion, doubt, and curiosity spread through the aisles. "What's going on?" one of them murmured, still unable to believe what their eyes were seeing. The elderly woman seemed so simple yesterday, so easy to disregard. But now, surrounded by lawyers and with such a firm posture, there was something about her that no one had expected. The manager, who was quickly approaching, was the most surprised of all. The same woman he had coldly expelled the day before now seemed to be in a position of power. He hesitated for a moment, but soon regained his authoritative posture, trying not to show the nervousness that was beginning to build up in his chest. He walked toward the elderly woman, his steps a bit quicker than he would have liked, but his face still wore the serious expression he always used to handle delicate situations. When he finally got close to her, his tone was formal, though his voice trembled slightly as he tried to hide his confusion. "Can I help you with something, ma'am?" He tried to sound courteous, but it was clear that the weight of the situation was already affecting him. There was no longer the arrogance from before, but rather a clear uncertainty, as he sensed that something big was about to be revealed. The elderly woman lifted her eyes toward him, now without any sign of the uncertainty or hesitation she had shown the day before. She observed him for a moment, unhurriedly, letting the silence between them be enough for everyone around to sense what was about to unfold. The lawyers beside her remained silent, waiting patiently. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, firm, and filled with an authority that made the entire room fall silent. "I am the owner of this market." Those words dropped like a bomb in the air. The manager, who had maintained a confident posture before, felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. His eyes widened, and for a brief second, he stood completely still, not knowing how to react. He opened his mouth to try to say something, maybe an apology or an explanation, but the words simply wouldn't come out. The impact of the revelation was too great. The employees nearby, listening to the conversation, exchanged looks of pure astonishment. The elderly woman they had treated with disdain and quick judgment was, in fact, the most powerful person in that place. Now, every action they had taken the day before weighed like lead on their consciences. The manager, for his part, finally managed to speak, but his words came out uncertain, almost hesitant. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't know." But the elderly woman interrupted him with a gentle gesture of her hand. She wasn't there to hear empty apologies. Her expression was not one of anger, but of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. She looked around at the employees, who were attentively watching every move, and calmly said, with the serenity of someone who carries the experience of many years, "I believe respect must always be present with everyone who walks through these doors, regardless of how they appear on the outside." The manager remained completely paralyzed. It was as if the ground beneath his feet had disappeared. He blinked rapidly, trying to process the words he had just heard. "Owner of this market?" It seemed like a mistake, a trick, something he couldn't believe. The simple woman he had ordered to be escorted out, that elderly lady with worn clothes and a slow walk, was the true owner of the company he worked for. His mind was in shock, but the elderly woman, with the same serenity that had accompanied her since she entered, kept her gaze fixed on him, seeing the whirlwind of confusion and disbelief in his expression. Without hesitation, she continued speaking, her voice soft, but filled with a strength that came from her long life journey. "Many years ago, my late husband and I founded this chain of markets. We started small, with a simple store, very similar to this one." She looked around, as if recalling the beginning of it all, when each shelf set up and every customer served represented a step toward the future. The manager, still perplexed, couldn't form a response. He knew he was facing a devastating revelation, one that would forever change how he saw the world around him. Every decision, every hasty judgment he had made the day before, now weighed on him with unbearable heaviness. "It was always our dream," she continued, "to create a place where all people felt welcome, where respect was the foundation of service. We grew over the years, expanded our business, but we never lost sight of the values that supported our company." Her voice trembled slightly when mentioning her husband, but she quickly regained her firm tone. "Even after he passed, I decided to continue because this project was much more than a business for us. It was our legacy." The manager's eyes began to lose the arrogance they always carried. Now he was motionless, listening to the story of the woman he had wrongly judged, never imagining her true identity. He realized, with each word that came from the elderly woman's mouth, the magnitude of the mistake he had made. "And despite all that," added the elderly woman, with a slight smile that carried deep wisdom, "I've always preferred to live simply. Life taught me that it's not material possessions that define who we are. I don't need expensive clothes or luxury to know my worth, or to remember how hard I worked to get here." She paused briefly, as if giving everyone around her, including the manager, time to absorb her words. The silence that followed was deafening. All the employees who had overheard her story were equally in shock, processing the fact that the elderly woman they had judged by appearances was, in reality, the founder and owner of the entire chain of markets. And yes, she concluded, with her eyes fixed on the manager, I am still the majority owner of this company. And what saddens me the most is not the fact that I was mistreated yesterday, but realizing that the principles we established when founding this market, the same principles that should guide customer service, have been completely forgotten. Her final words fell like a weight on the shoulders of everyone present. The manager finally understood there was no way to escape the impact of his actions. Not only had he been unfair, but he had also betrayed the values that supported the very place he managed. The elderly woman then looked around once more, as if she wanted to reach every person present with her eyes, before concluding, what you did yesterday reflects a world that needs to learn that someone's value is not measured by their appearance. And that is the lesson I hope everyone here learns today. The manager, still in shock, simply lowered his head. He knew her words were incontestable, and in that moment, the entire market seemed suspended in time as the truth and dignity of that woman spread like a silent lesson for all who watched. With the room still silent, the elderly woman took a step forward, looking at the manager and the employees with the same serenity she had maintained since entering the market. Her voice, though calm, carried undeniable firmness, and everyone knew that her words bore the weight of a decision that would completely transform that place. Changes will be made starting today, she began, her eyes slowly moving across the perplexed faces around her. This market, this company, was built on values that my husband and I believed were essential: respect, empathy, and dignity for all. It doesn't matter who you are, how you're dressed, or how much money you have in your pocket. What matters is that here, everyone must be treated with the same consideration. Her voice didn't rise, but there was something in her tone that made her words even more powerful. The employees, who had previously whispered to each other, were now completely silent, absorbing what she said. Some seemed ashamed, especially those who had participated in the unfair mistreatment the day before. The impact of their actions was finally weighing on them, and now they saw that the prejudice with which they had treated the elderly woman was not just a mistake. It was a betrayal of the principles that upheld that market. What happened to me wasn't just an isolated incident, she continued. It was a reflection of a culture that has spread here, a culture that judges and despises people based on their appearance. And that is something I, as the founder and owner of this market, will not tolerate. Her words were spoken with a calm sharpness, making it clear she wasn't making empty threats. She knew exactly what she wanted and how things should change. The manager, now visibly shaken, only nodded slowly, unable to interrupt. He knew that what was coming would require deep changes. Starting today, she went on, all employees, from the manager to the newest hire, will go through rigorous customer service training. It won't just be about sales techniques, but primarily about empathy, respect, and how to treat every person who walks through these doors with the dignity they deserve. The lawyers by her side maintained a serious and attentive posture. They were there to ensure that every word spoken by the elderly woman would be implemented, with no room for disdain or excuses. She looked directly at the manager and added, "And this starts with you. I want you to understand that your role here is not just to lead a team or ensure profits, but also to be an example of how to treat people. If you can't do that, then this is not the place for you. The manager, now pale and visibly worried, could barely respond. He knew the elderly woman wasn't asking. She was ordering, and he was on the verge of losing his job if he didn't show that he would be able to adhere to the new stance she was imposing. Furthermore, the lady continued, every customer who enters this market will be treated with the utmost respect, regardless of their appearance or condition. We are a reflection of the community we serve, and I want this to be a place where everyone feels welcome. She paused, allowing her words to spread through the room. It was a promise of change, a guarantee that this market would never be the same again. And, in some way, it was also a reminder that the world needed more empathy, more respect, and fewer judgments based on appearances. If anyone has difficulty following these new principles, she said, with a slight smile on her lips, then it would be best for them to find another place to work. Here, there is only room for those who understand that respect is the foundation of any business that intends to endure. The elderly woman, after announcing the changes that would be implemented in the market, stood firm, but with a glimmer of compassion in her eyes. She observed the manager, who remained frozen with guilt and shame. It was clear that he hadn't expected such a turnaround, and the weight of his actions was beginning to settle on his conscience. He didn't dare to raise his head. His thoughts were consumed by the fear of losing his job and the shame of what he had done. But the elderly woman, despite everything, wasn't someone driven by resentment. She knew that people make mistakes, just as she knew that everyone has the capacity to change, as long as they are guided in the right direction. Her life experience had taught her the value of forgiveness and redemption, and at that moment, she was about to impart a lesson that would remain etched, not just in the manager's mind, but in the minds of everyone witnessing the scene. With the same calm demeanor, she took a step closer, narrowing the distance between her and the manager. Her voice, now even softer, broke the silence that had fallen between the two. "I'm not going to fire you," she said, with clarity and serenity. The manager, who had expected the worst, raised his eyes in surprise. He couldn't comprehend it. After everything he had done, after treating her with such disdain and arrogance, was she really offering him a second chance? "I know you made a mistake," the elderly woman continued, looking him straight in the eyes. "I know your behavior was wrong and that your actions caused me humiliation. But I also believe that we all have the capacity to learn from our mistakes. Life is full of opportunities to change, and I believe in the power of repentance." The manager felt the weight of her words settle heavily on his heart. He knew that in many other companies, such an attitude would have cost him his job immediately. But this woman, with all her simplicity and wisdom, was offering him something far more valuable: a chance at redemption. "You will have the opportunity to show that you can be better," she said firmly. "But that doesn't mean everything will be easy from here on out. Changes need to happen, and for that, you will have to undergo training in empathy and customer respect. I want you to truly learn the value of treating every person who walks into this market with dignity." The manager, still processing what was happening, nodded slowly, unable to find words to express his gratitude for the generosity of this woman. His eyes were glassy, and he took a deep breath, realizing that this was his only chance at redemption. He was determined not to waste it. "I understand, ma'am," he finally replied, his voice trembling. I thank you for this opportunity. I promise I will do what is necessary to become a better person." The elderly woman smiled slightly, a smile full of compassion and understanding. She knew that people could change, and she knew that by giving the manager this opportunity, she was helping not only him, but everyone who was part of that work environment. "Life offers us many opportunities to learn," she said, looking around, as if her words were directed at everyone present. "It's up to each of us to decide what we do with those opportunities. I hope you use this one to grow and become a true leader." With those words, she stepped back, letting the manager absorb everything that had been said. She knew that from now on, his behavior would have to be exemplary, and more than that, he would have to lead by example, showing all the employees that respect and empathy were the pillars on which that market stood. The elderly woman's decision not to fire the manager was a life lesson for everyone who witnessed that moment. It showed that, no matter how much humiliation and disdain can hurt, the power of forgiveness and the opportunity for change always outweighs revenge. And there, in that market, the true transformation wasn't just in the new customer service policies, but in the way people would learn to treat each other from then on. As the months passed, a subtle but profound transformation took hold of the market. The atmosphere, once marked by coldness and judgment, began to shift, as if a new energy flowed through every aisle and every shelf. Customers who walked through the automatic doors noticed a difference in the air. It was no longer just a place to shop. Now there was a sense of welcome, as if every person was important, regardless of how they were dressed or what they carried in their basket. The employees, who had once looked sideways at certain customers, now acted with respect and empathy. The rigorous training, proposed by the elderly woman, had taught them not just customer service techniques, but also the value of seeing people beyond appearances. Now, when a customer entered the market, they were met with genuine smiles and a true willingness to help. The employees, once hurried and distant, had become more attentive to the needs of everyone who entered. The manager, in particular, had undergone a real journey of self-discovery. His days of training made him realize the impact his attitudes had on the environment and the people around him. He began to lead by example, treating every customer and employee with dignity and respect. Gradually, the atmosphere he managed became a reflection of that internal change, and the customers noticed it. Those who had once felt uncomfortable now frequented the market more often, feeling like part of a community where they were valued. The transformation in the market was gradual but visible. The space became more welcoming, the interactions more human and genuine. The atmosphere, once merely functional, now had life. People stopped to chat with each other. Employees knew customers by name, and customer service became a personal experience. And in the midst of it all, the elderly woman continued to visit the market. She would enter with her calm step, the same simple coat, the same worn shoes. But now, something was different. She was no longer unnoticed, nor was she ignored. The employees greeted her with respect and affection, knowing who she was, but also respecting her desire to maintain simplicity. To them, the elderly woman wasn't just the owner of the market. She was living proof that a person's true worth wasn't in the clothes they wore, but in how they treated others. Her smile, discreet but always present, reflected the peace of someone who had fulfilled her mission. She could have demanded luxurious treatment. She could have presented herself in a grand manner. But for her, what mattered was keeping her essence intact. And that was evident every time she walked through the market doors. The employees respected her not just for her position, but for the example she set, that true wealth comes from the heart, not from what can be displayed. Customers, many of whom never knew the full story, began to notice this lady. Some, unaware of her importance, observed the way she was treated and how she was always calm, serene. Others, who knew her story, looked at her with admiration, aware of the impact her presence had made in that place. She didn't need to say much, for her actions and her way of life were enough to convey the message of humility and respect. The moral of this story, which permeated the market and extended to everyone who worked and shopped there, was clear. One should never judge people by their appearance. A person's worth lies in how they treat others, in how they respect and act with kindness, even when no one is watching. And it was this lesson that, slowly, changed that market. The elderly woman, true to her nature, never sought recognition or glory for her actions. She continued living simply, showing everyone that forgiveness, humility, and empathy are more powerful than any rash judgment. And so, the market that had once been a scene of humiliation and disdain transformed into a place of respect and humanity, thanks to the wisdom and example of a woman who never stopped believing in kindness and in people's ability to change.